Good evening, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the Urban Thinkers Campus on Citizen Action Lab for Safe and Inclusive Cities. We are waiting for more people to join in, we'll give them a couple of minutes. So in the meantime, I just want to say thank you to all our partners for sharing their ideas at the start when we were thinking about this Urban Thinkers Campus and what format and what should we focus on. So first of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Elsa De Silva from the Red Dot Foundation, and our partners for this are the Urban Vision, Pratima Manohar, who is my partner on the Inclusive Cities. We also have the National Institute of Urban Affairs, NIUA India, Carme from the Catalan Agency for Development Corporation based out of Barcelona. We've had a lot of discussions with them, and then GIZ India, which supported our last year's Urban Thinkers Campus too. And this year we have Safety Pin supporting us as well with some of their knowledge partners and in the breakout rooms. So thank you to everyone. I want to remind everyone that this session is being recorded. And for those who find it difficult to hear, like yesterday, some people had connectivity issues. They kept going back and forth in and out of the Zoom, which seems to be our new normal. We will be circulating the session later, both the days, so you can listen to it. As you know, we are working off 2 sheets. One is the indicator sheet, which I put in the mail, where we are crowdsourcing indicators that are existing and things that you would like to also see in when we define safe and inclusive cities, and a Padlet where we are capturing action. So for those who are new and don't really know what an Urban Thinkers Campus is, it is a format under the UN Habitat's World Urban Campaign where they encourage people from diverse sectors to come together and discuss urban issues. And the idea is to give everybody a voice. And we've been hosting it as an associate partner of the World Urban Campaign for the last 3 years. Unfortunately, this year we couldn't host it in person due to COVID, but it's an opportunity because otherwise we wouldn't have so many wonderful people from around the world. And I saw the sign-in list, and we have people from Argentina and Cairo and from different African countries, different Latin American countries and European countries. So please, in the chat section, tell us who you are, your name, your organization, and your location. It's always fun to see who's in the room. And yeah, whilst people are still coming in, I'll ask Kajal to launch the poll, and I'll invite Pratima, who's our partner, to say a few words on the theme of the UTC.
Thank you, Elsa. I think Kajal's just launched the poll. I request all of you to take it. It'll give us a sense of who's in the room and what you're interested in. So I want to welcome everybody to day 2 of the Urban Thinkers Campus. Please also let us know where you're from, which organization and location in the chat box. We'd love to learn more. And I'm also going to request Kajal to share the Excel sheet with everybody of the UTC indicators, which we were crowdsourcing and co-creating with all of you yesterday, so all of you can look at it. Also share the Padlet link. We are asking you for your ideas on citizen action for better urban futures. I want to say a little bit about why we thought about this theme for this Urban Thinkers Campus. We all recognize that cities are central to our collective future, and COVID-19 pandemic has put the disparities and failures of cities under a magnifying glass, and especially highlighted that it has, cities are not very equal. We all recognize that this pandemic has disproportionately affected lower income and vulnerable population. And I think that was evident to all of us at the start of this crisis. And, we understand that, we are still going through it. And it's a good moment to reflect on what we should be doing for the future of our cities. One thing is clear: when we do re-emerge from this crisis, there is a desperate need to reshape our urban fabric to be more socially and environmentally inclusive. The most important questions that we have to ask about our collective future is, how do we build fairer, healthier and greener urban future? And that's what we're doing in this Urban Thinkers Campus. We're going to highlight specific metrics and indicators to think about socially and environmentally inclusive cities. As you know, we've been crowdsourcing existing indicators as well as co-creating new ones, and identifying data sources to specify and define inclusive cities further. And the big thing that we are pushing all of you to do is share your ideas for citizen action to build back better. I think when we were kind of visioning this with Elsa at Red Dot Foundation and Carme, who's been a great mentor, and Hitesh, Professor Hitesh Vaidya from National Institute of Urban Affairs, all our fanciful goal was to create an ecosystem of public problem solvers to enable bottom-up change and to empower communities to make change happen within their cities. And even if it's a small change, we'd love to see ideas from all of you. So we've posted the link to the Padlet in the chat box. Please continue to add your ideas for what you would like to see as improvements within your communities. So I think the poll is still on. I hope all of you are answering it. We'd love to hear where you're all from. And also, as we mentioned yesterday, today we have 4 breakout rooms. One is inclusive cities, inclusive mobility, enabling informal economy and markets, and rethinking social and health infrastructure. So the numbers are listed in the chat section. So please rename yourself so it becomes easier for the team to send you to the breakout room later. Kajal is going to be posting the numbers in the chat box, and continue to tweet and share your thoughts on this important issue on social media. The hashtags are below as well. I'm going to request Kajal to share that again. It's @ForMyCity. And please share your ideas for civic action within your communities. And we'd love to make a little collage of it later on. And we are going to be hosting a session on the World Habitat Day on October 5th, where we'll be sharing some of those ideas and also kind of collating these indicators that we've crowdsourced and co-created with all of you on that day. Because this is the decade of action, which UN Habitat announced earlier this year, right before we all had to kind of cover down and shelter in place in our homes.
I think we should end the poll. So quickly, if people want to still take it, I'll give you 30. Okay, we've already ended it. Okay. Prathama, do you want to read out the results?
Can you read it out? Because I can't seem to see it.
So 90% have attended day 1, which is great. So there's continuity, but no worries for those who've come in today. You're still welcome. And there's still a lot of work to do and a lot to share as well. Biggest takeaways from day 1, 69% feel we need more citizen participation in city planning. That's great. That's why y'all are here. 49% say city officials need to make data open source. 54% says city officials must engage with citizens through innovation challenges. And I think we heard about those innovation challenges yesterday as well. 46% say we need more diversity in city design and planning. That's true. If you can't, if you don't have lived experiences, it's hard for you to design accordingly. 40% says indicators need to be more accessible, and 29% says indicators need to be more easily understood. And I'm here because I want to, and it's very encouraging. 54% say make my city safe and inclusive. 49% incorporate new ideas into my work. So that's again the action part of it, which yesterday as well was very high. 60% says listen and understand this topic better. That's great. And we have a diversity of experts. So that's, really helping us improve our collective understanding. Great. So welcome everyone once again. Prathima.
Thank you, Elsa. And thanks to all of you for sharing your thoughts on that poll. It's very nice to see that everybody wants to take part in action, and we need that to inspire change in our cities. That's really, that's the message that we want to take out of this session. So we're going to begin the proceedings today with a keynote on Citizen Manifesto by Isabel Anglovsky, who's the director of Barcelona Lab for Urban Environmental Justice and Sustainability. She's also the member of Manifesto Poland. We're so thrilled to have you here with us, Isabel. Isabel?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for the introduction. Good, good.
I know you're in Spain, in the mountains.
Yes. And thank goodness I have connection. So that's at least the good news.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today to inspire us about developing citizen manifestos and why health and well-being and environmental justice is correlated. Do you want to share your slides?
Yes, I will. Yes. Host disabled attendee screen sharing.
Kajal, we need your help in giving our host rights.
Seems that it's okay.
Try now.
Yeah. Can you see it?
Yes. Would you like to make it a full screen? Yes, works.
Okay. All right, so let me know if you don't hear me, but I've divided this presentation into two parts. One that talks a little bit about the criteria that we use in our work for defining resilient cities that can be at the same time sustainable and inclusive, so resilient to climate change and to other threats, and respond, let's say, to calls, to international calls for greater environmental sustainability, both from a mitigation and an adaptation standpoint. And then I'm talking a little bit about the type of work that we've been doing in our lab and how we've linked up to some local initiatives in Barcelona and beyond to create those more environmentally safe and just cities. Thank you so much, by the way, for the invitation. I hope I'm not too much out of place with my European, centered experience. I would try to not just think from the point of view of what we do directly, but also, of course, how that's relevant to the work of many, and I'm looking forward to others as well. So basically, the question that we are asking ourselves in our lab, and I'll talk a little bit about the lab afterwards, is for whom are sustainable, green, and healthy cities? Are we talking about cities for just a few privileged classes and races, or are we building cities of the future that are low carbon, that are resistant to climate change in ways that historically marginalized groups can also be included in benefiting from all of those changes? And so that brings us a little bit to, let's say, the main concepts, the main indicators that we work with to try to understand whether cities are, let's say, moving towards just environmentally just cities that can also be healthy and livable for all. So if we take into consideration, let's say, the wide academic and activist literature that exists on environmental justice, what do we know? We basically know that by race, ethnicity, class, social status of many sorts, those environmental bads, if you will, those environmental risks that are explained here on those slides, so contamination and risks, are not, let's say, divided evenly by those different social indicators. And you go here, you talk about contamination, climate risks, access to green and public space, fresh and affordable food, healthcare, and healthy housing. And so, of course, residents of higher classes, white residents, global North immigrants in particular, male, etc., tend to be those that have greater access to those environmental goods mentioned here, so green space, for instance, or food. And let's say opposite categories, social categories, have greater exposure to contamination or climate risks, or less ability to access healthy housing. So in relation to, for instance, to contamination, just on this slide here, this is an example of the city of Flint, Michigan, where more than 60% of the population has to drink contaminated water. That's in the first economy of the world. And that's also in a city where 53% of the residents are Black and 40% of the residents are poor. So they have access to lead contaminated water. Climate risks. You take the case of Dhaka in Bangladesh. Every year there are floods that subside in the city, that collapse housing, transport infrastructure, and that, of course, informal workers, residents who live in less stable housing conditions, are way more impacted by those extreme climate events. What do we see as well? We see it in relationship to green and public space, for instance, where in the case of New York City, as I show it here on that slide, the residents that have access to these new longitudinal green space called the High Line are those that live in the multi-million-dollar condominiums that are being built around the High Line. So again, access to green space, access to public green amenities that are not even, that are unequal by race and by class in the US. What do we see as well? We also see, of course, the conflation of two different types of, let's say, risks or environmental factors. So for instance, we can see how climate risks and access to green and public space are just compounding, are just kind of accumulating negatively on one space for some groups. So I'm giving you here the example of East Boston, in the city of Boston, where the new climate resilient infrastructure that you see at the bottom part of the slide and on the right part of the slide are benefiting high income residents that are now the ones that are living in these kind of resilient buildings, and at the same time having access to what are called green resilient parks. And at the same time, the residents that tend to be Latino residents in that particular case are those more exposed to flooding, are exposed to more extreme events in that same neighborhood. So kind of these compounding risks and vulnerabilities. And so what are we trying to work on in our lab that is a bit of the intersection of civic and academic responses for livable and inclusive cities? Again, trying to think about climate risks, access to green space, access to food, access to healthy housing, all of those different characteristics that make cities sustainable and environmentally, let's say, responsive. So what type of, let's say, sustainable and equitable alternatives are we proposing? So of course, what do? We are academics in our lab. We are, let's say, 20 of us at different types of at different moments of our career, who are studying in different ways environmental justice issues in cities. So our research is theme and issue driven. So we look, for instance, at some particular climate interventions and whether they reproduce exclusion of informal workers, for instance. We also have neighborhood-based research and support to local groups and campaigns. So we take the entire territory of a neighborhood and we look at different types of interventions that are meant to be addressing different types of climate risks or, let's say, low carbon needs. And then we work with different NGOs and different neighbor associations to support their campaigns through the research we conduct. Then we also have more citywide research and support to local groups and campaigns. So if you think about environmental justice, for instance, that is a term that has been used a lot in American cities, North American cities, as well as in Brazil, as well as in India. but let's say historically more in rural parts of those countries. And what we're trying to say here is that actually environmental justice can be the pivot point, can be the gluing discourse framework around which local groups and local campaigns that are very kind of neighborhood driven can actually come together and claim different cities. So not just the right to the city, which is, I know, a big platform and a big campaign that's being used, but really kind of this urban environmental justice work that is across territories of the cities. And even though each neighborhood has its own EJ issue, environmental justice issue, then they can come together around campaigns. And then finally, we have this policy engagement work where the type of work we do is fed into different types of, let's say, mobility policies or green economy policies that the city of Barcelona in particular has been developing. So that's the three types of research areas that we work on: critical sustainability, so thinking about sustainability way beyond, let's say, policy discourses. We talk about global environments, different types of flows and resources that are also influencing our cities. And then another thread which is related to health and equity. And so just to give you a few examples of the work that we've done, one of it has been to try to support local groups which are trying to improve an urban mobility initiative, which is called the Superblock of Barcelona. We are supposed to have 500 of them being built in the city. And what you have to think about here is how 3x3 block grids are meant to be completely traffic pacified, are meant to be completely given back to residents, giving back to pedestrians, giving back to public space in ways that can really alter mobility patterns in the city, get rid of private cars, and at the same time reconstruct private, let's say, citizen-driven initiatives. So here, what have we done? We've supported the campaigns of those groups that are trying to make those public spaces more inclusive, that are also trying to make them less prone to real estate redevelopment in ways that creates gentrification or displacement. And so we've done several videos kind of visualizing and sharing the campaigns of neighborhood groups with the city and beyond the city of Barcelona. We've also been working on a project where we research what is called climate refugees. So those are spaces that are meant to be built inside the city, or existing spaces meant to be transformed with green and blue infrastructures to address climate risks and impact. And so what have we done here? We have worked with different organizations to create together, thanks to the research that we've been trying to put together, different types of climate refugees in the cities. Some are in schools and some are in public plazas. And so our research informs, let's say, the residents-driven initiatives by doing surveys, by doing community meetings, by doing multi-stakeholder meetings about the needs, about the different social and environmental vulnerabilities that the neighborhoods we are studying are facing. And then we do also outreach. So we are researchers, but we try to get a little bit out of our ivory tower. And so we've done global webinars, we do summer schools as well, professional courses with local nonprofit around, again, kind of these indicators or those concepts behind which we try to move a little bit the way in which urban planning is being conducted. We also try to link a lot to local media, especially in Barcelona, and to global media to have this kind of visibility, this kind of credibility outside academia that academics need as well, but also for us to really support the plight of neighborhoods and make them, let's say, use our academic power, if you will, to visibilize and to share some of the concerns that neighborhood groups have had. Some of the events also that we've been doing. So it's kind of a mix together, right? It's outreach, it's advocacy, it's events, it's academic research to try to build more just and sustainable cities. Also writing different types of academic blogs and different types of writing outputs that can be very easily shared on social media. So we have a very good social media manager who really puts a lot of time visualizing the different struggles of neighborhoods, kind of mediated by the writing that we try to do on them, which is not always easy. And so to go a little bit more in depth into what some of the more campaign work that we've been doing has been about, I wanted to talk about the manifestos. So the manifesto that Elsa has been referring to is not the first one I'm going to mention, but that's the one upon which the other one was built. So when COVID started, we decided that because we are a group that works on caring cities and well-being, we also thought about how can we reflect upon our own practice as academics to make academia also a little bit more of an academia of caring, and an academia where we can shift a little bit the productivity driven practice that has been the focus of academia. So we all started as 4 colleagues who know one another, who kind of were like, you know what, we're not going to be working on academic publications for the next few weeks, few months. We want to reflect on what we want the field to do. What are the priorities that academia should be looking for in relationship to COVID? So we went from 4 colleagues, wrote the draft, and then shared it with close contacts for feedback and initial signatories. So we got maybe around 50, 100 signatories this way. Then those people have told us, okay, you need to build greater legitimacy if you want to really have greater clout, if you want to really appeal to your audience, which in that case was academics, right? And especially so academic administrators, so the big bosses in academia. So we were invited by this academic journal, Planning Theory and Practice, to edit and publish our manifesto. And then from there, we were able to share the manifesto and get another 700 signatures of academics. So it's quite a lot because we're talking about high-level academics. And to be able to share this manifesto embedded, let's say, within this journal, we use global listservs within our field, and we've done very, very intensive social media work. So that was the first manifesto. And because we published it a lot and we shared with our own networks of activists, as I was telling you earlier, so feminist groups who work on inclusive mobility, those who do affordable housing work, they were like, wow, this is a great idea to have a manifesto. We should do something similar to think about not only the academia of the future, but the city of the future post-COVID. And so I was contacted by a colleague, sorry, Massimo Paolini, who wanted to address basically the manifesto to the mayor of Barcelona. Oh, sorry. His point was, we need to reach high. It needs to be directly to the mayor. And so here, between him and us and others, we use the work and the networks of our local NGOs, feminist groups, environmental groups, even healthcare professionals and other academics to write the manifesto. And what does the manifesto do? It basically thinks, okay, we're not going to do a tabula rasa of the entire city. We need to think about what are the existing enduring social environmental challenges that Barcelona faces, and how do we relate them to the COVID crisis. And so the manifesto is organized around 4 priorities: mobility, nature in the city, decommodification of housing, and degrowth. And it also builds on some of the seminars that we've been given and the webinars I was telling you earlier about that we shared with the broader academic, nonprofit, and civil society community. So the manifesto also draws upon, let's say, communication work and knowledge transfer work that we've done before. What did Massimo do? He also created just a Twitter account about the manifesto, so that that manifesto can be shared in a very visible way, can be reproduced, can be replicated, and can really be its own entity per se, and can evolve. He's got a lot of visibility also with the media, having talked about it, having really just published articles about what is the city of the future. So not just the manifesto itself, but the themes itself. So local articles have picked up on what is a future nature-driven city? What is a future city where mobility is both sustainable and inclusive from the point of view of race, gender, and ethnicity? So the piece of paper is only one piece of paper, and it's much broader. I'm sorry, I have to stop, but thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. I think that was fascinating. I mean, especially to hear that Detroit's, even in the most economically forward city, you have vulnerable citizens who face more inequalities with toxic air, lead poisoning, or bad quality water. And I think we all recognize that, I remember reading this op-ed in Economist recently, where they said that watching this pandemic is like the preview to climate crisis, and neither the virus nor climate change cares much about borders. And it really kind of highlights that climate risks and events like this, like the pandemics, will affect all of us and demand government action on a scale that we've never seen in peacetime. So hopefully we see, city governments responding to these agendas. And I think citizen manifestos and citizen outlining what they want and creating campaigns around them is so crucial to keeping the keeping the political leadership accountable to these agendas. Elsa?
Yeah, thank you so much. That was fascinating. I really loved it. And I think it sets the tone for the rest of the discussion. So now I'd like to invite Namrata Kilpadi to share a few words on her work. She's the campaigns manager at change.org, which is the world's largest technology platform to create social change, with 30 million users in India and 20, I think more than that, 200 million users worldwide. So Namrata, over to you.
Thank you so much, Elsa. It's such a pleasure to join all of you and to also listen to the keynote address.
Namrata, we can't hear you clearly. If you can speak up a little bit.
Okay, sorry, I apologize for the terrible internet. I'm just having to make my peace with that. So I just said it's a pleasure to join all of you. Thank you, Elsa, for having me. A lot of what Dr. Isabel spoke about definitely resonates with us at change.org. We are at the center of a lot of citizen-led fights in different cities, whether it's lighting up streets in Delhi or saving a forest in Mumbai. We increasingly finding that given the challenges posed by COVID and the lockdown, which was the biggest lockdown in human history, with 1.3 billion of us sent indoors for an indefinite period of time, digital campaigning is really increasingly the way for citizens to be heard. It's difficult in these circumstances to go and knock on doors of supporters or those in government. But I think that there are increasingly a lot of tools that citizens can use, whether it's a platform like ours, change.org, where people start petitions, or starting a group on Facebook where like-minded individuals come together. These are just ways and means for people to rally around causes that they care about and to attempt to shape political agendas in a way that are people-friendly, environment-friendly, and basically going against the grain, whatever has been the way of framing policy all these years. I just want to talk about how a manifesto could be a first step to something that grows into a campaign and then becomes a movement. And all it really takes is one individual or a small group to stick their necks out, to speak up, and to put their stories out there. I increasingly feel that when we're talking about policies, it's important to humanize that process by telling the stories of how people are affected, what's at stake, in order to really be able to make a persuasive argument to the powers that be. Elsa?
Sorry, thank you. So, yeah, so we are inviting our fireside experts to share just the start, the framing piece from their work. So thank you, Namrata. We will call on you a little later. We now have Pranav Naik. Pranav Naik graduated with a master's degree in architecture from Tallinn, the Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture in USA. He's a cyclist who is constantly observing the urban environment and looking for opportunities to make small changes in it. And he has a really interesting example from my city of Mumbai, which will then, kind of tie in what Dr. Isabel said and also what Namrata said.
Hi everyone. Thanks Elsa and Pratima for having me here. And I'd like to show a project which is sort of our offline method of trying to do a change.org petition. Though I send hundreds of people, I think, to change.org. My Facebook wall and everything is always full of it. But let me just start. I'm going to quickly show you all a presentation. Yeah, can you see now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I run a practice called Studio Pomegranate, which is an architecture and urban design practice. About 40% of our work is urban design, and the rest is architecture and interior design, etc. But I'll be showing you just one project which has made a difference to the community it's in. It's a part of a much larger project, but I'm going to show you only a part of that larger project. About 7 years ago, when we started our practice, there was this like just difficult. I mean, it's still difficult to walk in Mumbai. It is impossible. You walk off a footpath and just fall into something. You have these kind of places, and the thing is that 1.5 crore people walk every day, and everybody, even people going in cars, are pedestrians. So why isn't anyone taking care of this situation? So we decided to do something about that, and in our neighborhood we did one of these little footpaths. It was only 120 meters long, and it was covered in all these newspapers on the front page, etc. This footpath was then copied by the MCGM, and so I always say that they hear you but they don't listen. So they did this because it's square. They thought that we had done square tiles, so they put square pavers in its place. Now we try to go and explain to them that, hey, this is not what it is supposed to be, but they don't. Like I said, they don't listen. And we've been talking to them for a long time since. Now the project I'm going to show you is the Mumbai Mile, which is some pedestrian infrastructure under a bridge at Lower Parel. There was this bridge which is opposite Phoenix and outside Kamla Mills. So for people outside of Bombay, it's like right in the middle of South Bombay, and it goes north and south on Tulsi Pipe Road, which is the road over a pipeline that serves water to the whole city. There was a lot of illegal parking under this bridge, and it was a bit dirty. There was some little shops set up there. There was all of this illegal parking. People were using it like a toilet and just spitting everywhere. And it was just not a nice place at all. The roads go on, there's two roads that go on two sides of it. There was a U-turn in between. There were some messes, there was some kind of mess out there because of where that U-turn was located. And there was some space for people to cross. That space was really little, and it was only where cars also crossed. So we didn't like that idea. We moved the U-turn ahead. We added more crossing spaces and reduced that front portion so that cars can gather out there and turn. There can be turn lanes for cars. Then we started streamlining everything and made the whole space in the middle a pedestrian space, pedestrian and public open space. We added some amenities. We put some toilets and accessible toilets and everything in there, which is in purple. And we made some space for taxis because it's a commercial area. There's a lot of taxis coming in and need taxi stands. So we made space for taxis. Okay. And that effectively increased the space that you could walk, and people could now walk in the shade. Now, that's the comparison between what we had before and what we've got now. I'm going to quickly run through some images so you see what it was like before and what it is like now. The image on the left is the day that we started the work. We needed police bandobast. We needed this whole police people to be there. But even then, about 40 gundas came and started hitting everybody and beating us up and all of that and made us stop the work. So we actually only finished, we only started the work almost 2 months after this day. And then on the right is something that happened 4 months after that day, when we had actually finished all the work, and all the politicians, the gundas, everybody turned up for that ribbon cutting ceremony and participated in it. I'm going to quickly show you how we did this. There was an urban zone which we took to the MCGM, and we designed it with the help of local residents, politicians, and MCGM departments. What I think we should do is we should start removing ourselves, that is like Studio Pomegranate or anyone who is outside of the MCGM, which is the civic body, from this whole argument. We need not be part of this idea of making public space in a city. Public infrastructure should be made by the city, and it should be done innately. It should be a part of your ownership of the city. So finally, that kind of brings that whole model down to a very small block like this, where people like us can still show what can be done and help, but we need not be a part of the solution. And so these are some comparisons. I'd like to also show you what that free open space has done for the people. It's given space for people to relax. There's old people who come and sit there, sleep. There's this man who comes every night and plays this banjo and works on his laptop. He does this every night. Kids playing, cultural events. There are these boys. There are 6 groups of these boys who come every night between like about 10 and 3 a.m. and they dance. They're about 12 to 14-year-old, and they come from all over the city. I find it unnerving, and I really do not like that they have to come from as far as Powai and Kurla and Kolaba to come here, and it's totally unfair towards them. So we are trying to do some events for them as well. These are some other boys at 7 o'clock where they come do parkour, BMX, skateboarding, all kinds of things out here. This is a typical day in the evening under the bridge. It's a public space. It's free. It's open. It's open 24 hours, unlike some parks that the BMC runs. More people. Here's the taxi bay, where the taxi union was very happy to have this and inaugurated it. This is what it used to look like, and this is what it is now. It's a much more streamlined way to get into a taxi. Yeah. During the lockdown, they were using it for food distribution. That was great. Now, what we've been doing is we have been calling people from the government, the police, the MCGM, the Chief Minister's office, everyone, trying to bring them here and show them what it is. They have listened, they have heard, but again, they are trying to do the same thing in other places without doing any of these pedestrian crossings or anything. They're making parks under bridges, but there's no way to get into them. So we're really like breaking our heads as to how to do that. And that's why we started this thing called Design Crowd, where we would encourage the local people to do their own research and bring about awareness in them that how we can do all of this together, design and innovate these spaces together, and empower and engage them to go to the politicians in a group and demand all of this from the city. which is kind of a shiny and exciting space when you look at it from this angle, but it has a really rather murky underpinnings in there. And people live in such deplorable conditions that we cannot expect them to do this kind of work. So that's where we are at. But we still believe that we can do all of this together with the help of everyone.
Thank you, Pranav. That was so visual, and it really brought home the problems of a city, but also, the possible solutions if you have committed citizens like yourself. And that's where our action plans come in. We would love to see some of these people in our Zoom room right now take up some of the causes. You're not alone. I'm sure 2-3 of us can, collaborate and come together. And there are so many tools that one can use. So one is, change.org as well. And yesterday we saw how Srinidhi from Rising Flame is using it to get people to sign up so that blind or visually impaired folks can watch the cricket. So that's really important. I would now like to invite Sahil Sashidaran. He's an urban practitioner come researcher working as a technical expert with GIZ in India. His colleague spoke with us yesterday, but Sahil is really going to connect both Namrata and Pranav's work in response to Isabel. So welcome, Sahil.
Thanks, Elsa, and thanks, Pranav and Namrata, for your excellent presentations. First of all, I'd really like to mention that, Isabel, your work was really inspiring. I really enjoyed the linking of academics and research with practice on the ground, looking at a manifesto that can bring things together. That, I think, is very much also the framing that our project operates on. So just to quickly introduce myself, I work with GIZ, which is the German agency for international cooperation, on a project called Sustainable Urban Development Smart Cities. Can you all see me and hear me clearly? Because I'm not able to see myself. 1 second. Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you and see.
Okay, good. Yeah.
And please use speaker view, everyone, so that you can see the speakers.
Thanks. Yes, sorry about that. Yeah, so as part of Sustainable Urban Development Smart Cities project, what we're trying to do is we're trying to focus on 3 smart cities. So the one that I work in is in Kochi, and there are the other 2 focus cities are Coimbatore and Bhubaneswar in Tamil Nadu and Odisha. Kochi is in South India, in the state of Kerala. And we work here on a very interesting project that I'd like to share, because what we do is we focus on the aspect of inclusion. So I don't have a presentation. What I'm going to do is share 2 websites which we have prepared as part of this project. Again, Elsa, if you could just confirm that you can see my desktop. Just sharing it now. Oh, okay. Sorry, I don't seem to have sharing rights on this computer for some reason.
You can just post it in the chat link.
Yeah, people can probably take a look at the website right now. So I'm just going to share one of them. I think Elsa has already shared with all of you. So I'm just going to start talking about this project. This is a project called Ende Kochi. Ende in Malayalam means my or mine, and Kochi obviously being the city. So this is basically somewhat a form of what we would call an urban living lab that we did here in Kochi in 2019, and we are now continuing it in another form, and that's the second website that I wanted to share, which I'm also typing while I'm telling you about it. So let me just speak about Ende Kochi before I go on to the next part. Ende Kochi is this urban living lab that we set up. We've borrowed this model from 2 events that were done in Hamburg in Germany called Next Hamburg. And then there was another one in Bangalore called Next Bangalore. So these 2 events that happened, I think, if I'm not wrong, somewhere in 2017-18, during that period, we got inspired by that and we decided to bring that to Kochi as part of our project. We were working with local partners, national partners and international partners, and I'd like to name them just because it's very important. We really do believe in this vocal for local in that sense. And we worked with Design Combined here in Kochi. We worked with Herbs from Mumbai, by the way. They're based in Dharavi in Mumbai. And we worked with them as the national partners. And we had, on the international front, we had Urbanista, a German firm, which was doing all of this exciting living lab kind of models. And we brought different knowledges together. Why did we do that? So Isabel just spoke about this framing of urban environmental justice. And also, she brought in these elements of inclusion, sometimes that we leave certain sects of society outside the kind of work that we do, especially when it comes to, say, urban planning and city design. Even when Namrata spoke about change.org and Pranav, you spoke about the public space design that redesign that you guys have done. The challenge always is, how do you speak to different communities? How do you ensure digital inclusion, because not all of them can participate on digital platforms. So these were the kind of questions that we were struggling with when we were putting together this lab. What we thought would be a good way, and if some of you might be scrolling through the websites, what you will realize is the Enter Kochi format was laid out in the form of offline and an online portal. The idea was to have a living lab that would be both physical in nature and digital. And how did we do that? First thing we did was we looked at the city of Kochi, and I don't know if any of you are aware of this, but Kochi holds the Kochi Biennale, which is like this humongous contemporary art festival, globally renowned, and it happens once in every 2 years. And luckily, in 2019, actually it began in December 2018 and went on till March 2019. So that was the period when in March we were able to kind of launch the physical lab part of it in the location where, the Biennale venues were also there. So this was our way of connecting it back to the city. We set up the physical lab in Fort Kochi area, but that's like the island part of the city, if people are aware of the geography of Kochi. And the mainland part of the city, what we did was we selected a bouquet of different locations across the city that would represent different geographies, different kinds of neighborhoods. This is also building on Dr. Angel Chu's presentation yesterday, where she was talking about how there's spatial inequity across the city, and it's not just about having SDG indicators at the city level, but looking at them in a more disaggregated along the neighborhood and local areas kind of a format. And that was something that we were trying to do by making sure that we were representing different kinds of neighborhoods in the city. We also brought in the local ward councillors or the political representatives into that process. And Enter Kochi ran from March 2019 till the end of June 2019. So it was almost like a 4 to 5 month long process where we had extensive set of offline and online communication. So some of you might have seen the website. I wish I could have shown it, but we had an online survey. We had part of it was also spatial in nature. So there was some mapping that you could do on the online tool. And at the same time, physically in the lab, we had this model of the city where we were basically, it was an interactive model. So the whole idea was that both the physical exhibition as well as it's not a digital exhibition, it's a digital participation tool, but both of them were interactive in the sense that people could come in and they could give us information about the city. This way, we were able to reach out to around 15,000 odd stakeholders across the city over this period. And that's pretty decent when it comes to Kochi being like around 600,000 people. And this was all done in partnership with the Kochi Municipal Corporation. So GIZ is a Indo-German bilateral cooperation technical agency. So what we did was we used our platform to enable that linkage between the local and the national represented through our project. And we were able to really bring these actors together to kind of lay out this framework of how to do participation that is both digital and offline at the same time, and try to bring those knowledges together. All of this was then taken back, presented back to the city. So we had around 6 locations that were part of the offline, what was called the Urban Typhoon Consultation series. That's actually a format that we borrowed from Herbs, and we used that in the city. We did 6 extensive local consultations. And the key point that I'd like to kind of share here was how we brought in local knowledge along with, say, technical knowledge of, architects, urban planners, designers, etc. What we did was we asked local residents who were part of those workshops, and these were public workshops, they were open to anyone. I'm talking about the neighborhood consultations, and they were so was the public exhibition, but this was particularly geared to reach out into the communities, to kind of map across 4 or 5 wards in the city, so not just 1 or 2 neighborhoods, different kinds of neighborhoods. And then we did these transact walks, which were led by the residents or the representatives themselves. So in a meeting, we would just randomly ask 4 or 5 vocal people to take us to walks that could show us problems and solutions in their neighborhoods. And they would just take us for half an hour or 45 minutes. The entire group would break up into these 4 or 5 groups. So what this did was this took away this the agency of knowledge from the technical side. There's always this contradiction between technical and local knowledge, and what we wanted to do was set up platforms that could equalize that, and that was the interest of this entire exercise. What culminated in the end, because I really don't want to take more time and I hope that I'll get to share more later, what really culminated is the second website that I've shared in the link. It's called the endekochicompetition.org. So what we did is that we took all this knowledge that we got from this entire process, processed it through a series of design sprint workshops, which were again open to international, national, local actors who came in, brainstormed, came up with a series of strong ideas that were very important to the city. It was realized that Kochi, given Kochi's history, culture, geography, or I should say hydrogeography, what was decided was that there should be a focus on the blue-green infrastructure of the city. And that's how we finally ended up launching this urban design competition. It's a novel process. I'm very happy to share that just last week, we have shared out the results of this competition. If you go to the website, you'll see a winners tab there, and you can take a look at the kind of incredible work teams have put in together from all over the country. This was a national urban design competition. And the best part about it is we have the Kochi Municipal Corporation on board to help us now jointly implement these ideas that the winning teams have come up with. And that process is what we will be doing or engaging in for the rest of our project up till 2021. So I just wanted to share this as an example of how you can bring these different kinds of knowledges together, but at the same time, not kind of phase out on questions of equity, inclusion, to really ensure that, all spaces are used, all spaces already have activities that people are engaging in, and to include all of that requires extensive public participatory consultations. And that's what we really did. And we will continue doing that, even in the implementation part. So I just thought that this would be interesting to share. Thanks.
Thank you, Sahil. Thank you, all of you. I think you've all highlighted how, citizens have the power to change our communities with their own actions. And, for most of us, citizenship seems to be only about voting and maybe getting things from the government. I think all your thoughts kind of point to the idea of citizenship as about being about civic agency, where in a way citizens are co-creators of the community and the places that we live in. So thank you for sharing those insights, because we all need to come together to build those equitable places. Pranav, my first question is to you. I know from your work that it's really tough to do this, right? It's very difficult job to get the political leadership and government to really partner with you on these agendas. And you've been at it for a long, long time in the city of Mumbai. So can you give us some tips and lessons that you've learned through this process, where you've really been dogged about it, but what's the advice that you have for other citizen activists in the room today?
Well, like as you can see in Kochi, it's so much more of a cohesive process with the municipality also being on board with this. In Mumbai, it's a very different thing where they seem to be on board, but they're not. And so we have this You have to, it's almost like tactical urbanism all the way to the end. So even when the project is complete, you're still in tactical urbanism mode. You're trying to kind of like con them into doing the right thing, which is something that we should not feel like we're doing, because that feels wrong. So I think what we're trying to just do is trying to get more citizens aware about this. And unfortunately, because we are a small practice and we're running with so many different things, and these urban design projects take so long. So like so many of them, like this one took 2 years to build, of which it was only 4 months of actual construction. The rest of the time was simply finding, arguing, and fighting with people to get this done. And of those 4 months, 4 months before that were fighting with these gundas. So it's a really difficult thing to do, but we know that it's essential. And so as a practice, we're trying to get more people involved, like the local people. We've identified places around where there are these boys and girls who want to work on such kind of projects, and which will of course benefit them. But we're saying that, okay, come with us to the ward office, design this with us. So we're doing it in an offline mode, that we do it there in place, but we don't we haven't really been able to scale it up as such.
Any advice for other, citizen activists in the room? What are the first steps to start?
I think you should do whatever you can do. Like in all these places, in all our places, we are a democracy, and you can approach your leader, your ward officer, your corporator, your MLA. You can approach them. They have times that they're available. They're supposed to be available. So I'm saying that whatever little you can do, you should do. And that little starts growing into doing more things. And because you learn more, you learn from people like in this forum where I'm learning from you guys, and the same way people have learned from me and people are learning. So we all learn from each other and we figure it out. I don't think there's any new, really in this field, there's any new ideas. There might be, but I would rather just like stick with all the old and workable ones, copy as much as we can and just get this thing done. We need basic infrastructure that we don't have.
You're right. Sahil, obviously you have demonstrated with the program in Kochi that participatory processes are needed. Even to problem solve, we need to create an ecosystem of public problem solvers and in a way redistribute public problem solving with the citizens, and don't expect just the government to be the only entity to fix some of our urban challenges. So what advice would you have for citizens who are interested in partnering with local authorities or state governments? How can they do that?
Yeah, I mean, first I'd like to just echo what Pranav said. It's not easy. It's not at all. It might seem from the outside that the local body is on board and there's everything is already structured, but it takes a really long time. It's like I said, we started the actual work on Kochi in January 2019. But we started planning for it, I think, in September or October 2018. And even till today, we haven't hit the ground. Right now, we have just reached the point where, it's, it's September 2020. And we have just reached the point where we are now, we know that we have teams, we have the human capacity, which is the most important part, because if you don't have sensitive capacity, you can't really address all stakeholders. And that's mostly why politically projects fail. Because you've listened to a few stakeholders, but you've not really understood who the others are, and that leads to later on some kind of challenges on the ground. So I would really, I would share anecdotes about some things, and then pull out lessons from that. Number one, when we did Kochi, what we realized was that we have to foreground the vulnerable populations. So what we did, we specifically targeted persons with disabilities. So that was unique. We had a special target, section group as part of the outreach that we were doing under that participatory process, focusing on, calling it out, making it clear that persons with disabilities are a priority. How did we win through that? Ende Kochi happened. It was a small, like I said, 4 to 5 month process. But even till today on my WhatsApp, I'm connected to this informal group, which has now come together. They are, they're representatives of different sets of disabilities. They've really made all of us professionals here on the ground sensitive and understand that, disabilities extend beyond just visual or the hearing or speech disabilities that we are aware of. There's a spectrum out there, and that requires specific, effort to market out, to make, bring in universal design. And that really informed us that, when we go into the next phase, we will not back down on universal design. We will not back down on these questions of how to make sure public spaces are more inclusive. And it's always, the moment you start taking these efforts, they become even more difficult to do, because, new constituencies will keep adding on. But the idea is, how open can you make that process? So that's one advice to citizens and activists who are interested. Secondly, I would really recommend this amazing toolkit. It's called the Toolkit for Ethnographic Study of Space. It's launched by the CUNY, City University, New York, and their Graduate Center on Public Space Research Group. They've launched that. I would really recommend reading that, using that for any public space design. I think it's one of the best toolkits out there, which, whether it's global north, global south, it really responds to these needs of, spaces are alive. They already have a life of their own. How can you improve them with that life intact, taking care of all forms of life that already exist? How do you make sure that all constituencies are targeted? And that really then helps you reach out back to the political constituencies. So for example, in this case, we had to really work with councillors in these specific locations. We luckily had a very enterprising mayor in Kochi who was very helpful for us throughout this process. But then later on, because so much interest developed on the ground, and there was so much interest because participation happened, and it's been happening for like a series of events over like 1.5 years. So that kind of generated an interest that now even the MLA is interested, and not just one MLA, another one in the local nearby, so that's how you're not really building that interest by going and asking people to come in, but rather showing them that, this is what's possible. This is where we are moving towards. And so what I would ask all the citizens and activists here, try to create these platforms, because that's what we did. We didn't come in here to do anything else. What we did was, we recognized that in India, digital inclusion is a major challenge. An online platform alone cannot do it. And you need to create then offline platforms. And then we innovated in many ways. We thought of, pushing carts with models on them to show people. We thought about locations that people can come to and visit. Because of COVID, otherwise we already had planned to have an on-site exhibition and a stall that would be open throughout the 6 months of the design competition, so that people could come in and ask any question they want to. And it's our job, our prerogative to answer it. Because, we are the ones who are curating a process between all these different, scalar actors. Yeah, so that's like the core advice I have. Don't forget any constituency. Be mindful. This pandemic has really shown us, that in the city there are so many actors that we have been vulnerable actors, migrants, etc., who we've just been ignoring, and that's why it's really important to bring them back, and kind of call it out. That really helps. Thank you.
You're right. I think, Sahil, the pandemic has also shown how our civil society has contributed to problem solving. I mean, we saw a huge humanitarian crisis with, migrant workers not having access to food and housing during this time. And the civil society organizations have filled the role, played the role of the state by, giving them access to food and stuff during this pandemic. And I agree with you totally that platforms like Ente Kochi can actually, create that ecosystem of citizen activists who can drive change. And I think that's a good model to have, which is, create a creative platform for citizens to come together and problem solve in a fun way. Isabella, are you still here? Isabel?
Yeah, I'm absolutely here.
I wanted to say that, I know a lot of your work is also focused on health in cities, and that's such a kind of moving topic to connect urban policy to citizen outcome. I want to just give a little kind of statistic that a child that grows up in a city like Delhi with very bad air quality has 50% lower lung capacity than a child that grows up in a city with better air quality. And I know a ton of my friends who'd moved back from the US after school. They were based in Delhi, but they decided to get out of that city because of this reason. And a lot of people are not aware of the health implications of our urban planning policies. How do we connect these wonkish policy ideas to citizen outcomes and make a movement around it?
I mean, I think what you're saying is absolutely true, and there is absolutely a trend now to rethink where you want to live and where you're able to live, and the pandemic is accelerating, of course, new opportunities. What's interesting is that not only opportunities to move 10, 15 kilometers out of the city is really far away, and then telecommute, which is also quite interesting because at the end, this is all also filtered by class and by race and by gender, because you have to have the job, let's say, rank to be able to do that type of job. And if you're an essential worker, you're actually the one who is going to be, in a way, condemned to living in the city, and especially so in areas that are more polluted. And interestingly enough, some of those areas were also areas that have been more gentrified recently because, in the early 2010, there was this big movement to reoccupy the center of city, make them more livable, maybe get rid of cars and all of it. And so there was a big movement then to revitalize historic centers that ended up being gentrified. So now the big question is what will happen to all of it. I mean, I think in terms of urbanism, what I'm seeing are the cities that are doing it, let's say, to a certain extent in a quite bold way. So I'm going back to the superblock plan that Barcelona has, is really one that links itself to citizen initiatives that also work for other aspects in the city that are not only air quality. So it seems to me that, for instance, the discourse of just health, air quality is bad for you, like kind of the emergency type of discourse, the disaster discourse, doesn't necessarily resonate with people's mind. I mean, it's the same for smoking. Everyone knows smoking is bad, and so many people still do it. So I think that it resonates more with different aspects of quality of life that can change at the same time. So privileging the bikes, but making bikes and bike lanes safe, inclusive of different types of mobilities on bike lanes in areas as well of the cities that are more hilly, where more informal settlements and working class residents tend to be. So let's say privileging electric bikes that are included into the bike sharing system of the city for a very little amount of, let's say, expenses every month. So it's linking not only getting rid of cars to this new infrastructure, it's linking it also to, okay, getting rid of cars also means we're going to have these new public spaces. So who is going to be able to reuse those public spaces? And in the case of Barcelona, you have different feminist groups that are trying to develop new uses around the super blocks for schools, for kids, for families, for the elderly, so that they are really active public spaces. So, it kind of goes to, okay, maybe you have this agenda of emergent air quality that's being so prominent in the WHO, but then you link it to the big necessity in the ground of your cities. And then finally, I think something very important is that what you see in Barcelona is that area that tend to be greener, and it's not only Barcelona, it's other places, but that tend to have those super blocks, also more expensive, and those that now big real estate developments are coming in, big hotels are coming in. So you also need anti-displacement and pro-poor and pro-working class policies, so that in the end, it's not just mobility, it's like, okay, it's improved quality of life, public spaces, alternative commutes, but in areas that different classes, different races can live together. So you really need more public housing, more affordable housing. You need some form of rent control, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that in the end, it has to kind of depart the health emergency to other aspects, to, let's say, more micro tactics and micro frames that can be used.
I also remember spending some time in Barcelona and noticing that the general citizen was there was so much awareness about some of these urban issues, and everybody seemed to have an opinion on all of this. Is there something about the culture that allowed for that to happen?
I mean, Karma could probably talk way better than me about this. I think that Barcelona has had a very long history of citizen movements that date back from way in the dictatorship, like in the early 1970s, where neighborhood movements were very important in trying to provide subversive, more spaces of reflection, thinking the right to the city, the neighborhood, once the dictatorship was going to be over. Then they got into the municipality, they became planners. Some of them, you know, there were then also, of course, issues of kind of community, how can you still be true to your community when you become a municipal planner? But anyway, a very long history of movements in the 70s, but then also a parallel history of very vigorous alternative cultural movement and artistic movement, feminist movements of different ways. And I would say that now also immigrants tend to have a bigger voice in the city, like Latinos, North African immigrants, like maybe through their cultural associations, but also maybe like labor rights and all of it. And now I would say over the past 10 years, what become very prominent in the city are housing rights, anti-displacement, anti-eviction movements that became very strong during the 2007-2008 crisis and have really perdured and strengthened over time in the city as well. So that's a big history.
I know your current mayor was a very leading housing activist as well. So I think there's this culture of citizen activists running governments. We need some of that in India.
I see Karma's notes, absolutely right. Everyone in Barcelona feels like they are an urban planner. And it's also interesting because it is definitely a place, an urban, is always informally talking outside. Everyone is always on the streets, in plazas. They have these very informal encounters that I think, for instance, cities, those that have worked in the global north, in Northern Europe, don't have as much. And, you know, we even have an organization in the city that's called Fem Plaza. We built our plazas. Like, we are the ones who are going to really be deciding how to use a public square, and it's all over the city. So Karma is absolutely right. People feel entitled and feel they have to say something.
Sahil, I know you wanted to make a point here.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, you know, questions of diversity and difference, you know, because I think there are parts of this that, you know, apply to citizens and activists, but there are parts that also apply to practitioners. I think practitioners really have to take the responsibility to kind of counter, you know, how do you address questions of diversity and difference. And I just want to share one thing that, you know, I promised the Kochi informal group, you know, here, that, you know, they had asked me to, you know, at this forum, definitely say that, you know, not for us, without us. You know, it's a quote in relation to the point that, you know, you don't represent anyone until you're actually carrying them with you. You know, so bring them to those meetings. You know, when you're talking about the rickshawala on the street, bring him to that meeting. You know, that's the only meeting that you can actually really, you know, really talk about inclusion or, you know, and I think that's very important, because what Isabel, you're trying to say is that, you know, spaces lose out on questions of, say, better urban environments or, you know, environmental justice, precisely because the forums at which those discussions happen are kind of captured by urban elites. And in this, I really want to talk about an example in Delhi. You know, there was this whole program of kind of public participation called Bhagidari, which was launched by the previous chief minister. And the only challenge was Bhagidari was very successful. What it did, it connected municipal staff, local, you know, ward level staff to urban elites, you know, RWA members, etc. Now, the challenge was, before this connection was established through Bhagidari, that connection used to work for the urban poor. And once they got connected to a higher strata of society, they started not responding to the urban poor. And this kind of led to a backflip of the whole process of participation. So I always call this out, that participation is a very tricky thing. Too much of it is also in a way not well thought out, really leads to challenges. Just wanted to flag that for practitioners. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think the adage of not for us, without us is so crucial. And I remember a municipal commissioner once telling me that citizens have the cave mentality. And I asked him, what was that? This was a municipal commissioner in Mumbai. And he said, citizens against virtually everything. And I think that's the way, some of our political and government leadership think of all of us. So we need to make it very constructive. Namrata, are you here? Namrata? I think Kame has raised her hand. Kame, you want to comment? And I think Namrata, if you're here.
Just a comment. It's like just saying about has already been said. It's like the 70s neighbors association started with asking for very basic services in Barcelona. So everything was still to be done. So there was some kind of capacity of these associations to create this kind of cultural knowledge about how urban planning and things like that. But the process just came up very strange, and lately it's been difficult because neighbors association just lost their soul at some point. So now that the idea is getting all citizens involved, because finally they have some interest and they do not represent all of the interests. So that's the difficulty now for public administrations, to get everyone has to be heard. So that's the difficult one. So I agree with what's been said. Okay.
Namrata, I wanted your final comments on this. Are you here? If you're here, can you unmute yourself? We can't hear you. Namrata?
I think she's losing connectivity, so.
Okay. So I'm just going to ask her some questions, and she maybe we can get her on at some point, or it'd be great to have her comments on this. As you know, we are today focusing on developing citizen campaigns and manifesto. Any advice or toolkits that you recommend to our participants, please share that with us. And if you're not able to talk to us, please feel free to share those in the chat box.
So Namrata is here now.
Namrata, are you here?
I can't see audio.
Yes, Pratibha. I'm
Great.
sorry. Yeah, I'm right here. But yeah, can you just repeat the question, please?
As you know, we are kind of focused on developing citizen campaigns and manifesto in this session. So would you have any advice or recommendations to the participants in the room?
Sure. Absolutely. So really listening to things. I think of them as practices that those of you here who are thinking of launching citizen-led manifestos could keep in mind. So there's a plethora of issues under each problem that we see. What we always advise people who want to start a campaign to do is to think of the big triangle and then think smaller campaigns.
We seem to be losing your audio, Namrata. Namrata? I think Namrata has a bad internet connection at the moment. I am gonna.
Whilst we wait for her, because after this, after she says, she responds to Prathama, we will go in for a 5-minute break. But I want to remind everyone, you know the drill. Like yesterday, you have to pick one one breakout room. So we have inclusive housing, we have inclusive mobility, informal economy, and re-looking at social and health infrastructure. So if you can put the number against your name whilst you're on the break, yeah, my team will reassign you. And after the break, we will have experts deep diving into these 4 areas. I just want to comment that we have one change in speakers. Megha Fansalkar, took bad with COVID. So she's right now in hospital. We are sending her positive vibes. So she can't be with us. But Dhanashri from Shelter Associates will share her work. So we still have 4 speakers when we come back. And then we'll deep dive into those. So yeah, so let's just check if Namrata is back. Yes, she's back. Namrata?
Yeah, this is so terrible. Okay, I'll make a couple of quick points. Thinking of campaign or you have an issue, think of like the big triangle. It could be women's safety. Then think of smaller, actionable asks. Like for example, I'll give you the example of Bhavya Singh. She's an architect from Delhi who works on environmentally sustainable buildings, and she wanted her city Delhi to be safer. Instead of going to the government with that as an idea, she decided to start smaller by asking to install solar lights with 1 kilometer.
Okay, I think we still seem to have issues with your audio. Can I request you to maybe
Put it in the chat, maybe?
yes, advise that Namrata from change.org is on how do we develop citizen campaigns and push for our urban policy agenda. I'm going to request her to share some resources, toolkits on the chat box, and we'll make sure we bring, we do inclusive cities live casts every week, as you know, and we will bring her back to give you a detailed kind of masterclass on how to run campaigns and push for change in your cities.
Okay, so with that, I think let's go for a break. And it's right now 6:28 in Mumbai. We'll reconvene at 6:35. So 7 minutes. We gained 2 minutes for the break. So we'll see you back in 7 minutes. Please come back because we do want to co-create with you. So see you in 7 minutes.
Yeah, I know.
Maybe it was too much. Namrata, sorry we lost you there, but what we informed everyone is that we have Inclusive Cities, which is a live cast every Wednesday, and we will invite you for one of the episodes to share in great detail, because in the next 3 weeks, we are actually helping people work on their action plans and manifestos. And so hearing you in greater detail will be, I think, benefit to all. So we'll lay
Absolutely
for that, okay? Because I know you're having trouble with your internet.
Thank you so much, Elsa.
No worries, no worries. Take care of yourself.
Right. Thank you so much. I'll be a part of that. Thank you.
Great, great. So yeah, so thank you once more for all your wonderful thoughts, Isabel, Pranav, Namrata, and Sahil. I know Sahil had to leave. It was really, really insightful. It was exciting to see what citizens can do, honestly. And if every one of us made that small change to our city, it would be such a a big change in a way, small steps leading to big ones. And I got two very interesting quotes. One was, they hear you, but they don't listen. And that's true. And not for us, without us. And I think that's really critical. But thank you. And now we are going to deep dive into specific areas. So our first speaker is Supriya Jan. She is really amazing. I've featured her a lot now because I'm so in awe of her work. She is the program manager for Coro India's Right to Pee campaign. And she has been fiercely advocating on the ground for the last 11 years, especially for free, clean, safe public urinals for women in Mumbai and other parts of the state of Maharashtra. So Supriya, over to you.
Yes. Thank you, Elsa. Thank you, Pratima, and all of you for this opportunity to share. Yes, as we all know that social infrastructure and health infrastructure is a theme that was assigned. So I was bit thinking about how can I share with you all with the help of example that has been actually implemented thoughtfully with the grassroots voice in the community. So when we think of social infrastructure, we cannot think of it in isolation. It does have an health impact, and these two things are interconnected. So when we think of social infrastructure, there are many things that come to our mind. It may be water system, transport, education, museums, art and culture, many things. And to share our experience on ground, I decided to share with you about our Right to Pee campaign and one of its focused interventions in the communities. For us, when the question comes of what were the indicators and how we were trying to monitor and look through into our processes deeply. For us, when we think about our campaign, there are two SDGs. They are specifically very much relevant. SDG 6 and which talks about focus on ending open defecation and providing adequate sanitation facilities to all. And SDG 6B1, which talks about supporting and strengthening local communities in improving water and sanitation management. And we are also talking about not just these broad targets in SDG 6, but how can we engage civic officials, communities in developing a joint action plan. So before going into details, how have we localized indicators based on these SDGs, I briefly want to tell you about the organization that I represent is by name Coro India. Which was it is almost a 30 years old organization now, started in 1989. It is a grassroots based non-profit organization that focuses on facilitating leadership within marginalized communities, specifically working with women and youth by enabling self-reflection, steering right-based collective actions for social change. And there emerged one of the campaigns for those who are in Mumbai and those who might have heard about it on the online spaces. The campaign by name Right to Pee, which was incubated in 2011. So in earlier discussions, when people were talking about how difficult it is when it comes to working and collaborating with the systems or municipal corporations in a metro city like Mumbai. So yes, our campaign has been almost 9-year-old, and still we are trying many things to make a real change in the communities that we work. So Right to Pee, as Elsa already mentioned, a campaign for free, clean, safe public urinals for women in Mumbai, and also toilets for all across the genders. And we also believe that having access, availability, and also improving this access, all these are very integral parts of safe cities. And we at Coro have been a long-term partners of safe city networks with UN Women and other organizations across the city. So when it comes to solving the problem, it is not as simple as building a toilet. They must be culturally appropriate, environmentally sound, accessible at all times, attentive to gender needs. And to achieve this, as everybody has said, and I also want to reiterate, being a grassroots based organization, that local community members should be included, specifically women and girls, in the process of decision making as to location and design of the toilet. So when it comes to low middle income countries, rapidly urbanized, need for privacy, safety, toileting becomes even more urgent. And access to toilets that are safe, accessible, comfortable, then only we can expect world to see improvement in health, education outcomes, and productivity. And it has got a many physical and mental impact on our bodies, on our health. So this is just to set up a context before I get into example of intervention that I'm going to share with you all. This is an Right to Pee has been working in 3 different spaces. That is for sanitation at public spaces, railway spaces, and community spaces. That is particularly in the lower income community. So I will be sharing an example of our intervention in M East ward of Mumbai. That is one of the wards of Mumbai with a 9 lakh population and 15 administrative wards. It is also called as a resettlement ward or rehabilitation ward. It has industries, it has slaughterhouse, it is a dumping ground, it is highways, and it has witnessed highest air and groundwater contamination. Its human development index is lower compared to other wards of Mumbai. Now, what have we done? When it comes to SDGs, we have a broad targets like ending open defecation, having accessible, equitable toilets to all. They are very broad. So we thought, how can we localize this? And what can we do to make it really relevant to the people's day-to-day life, so that we can have a maximum participation. See, we as a grassroots organization, we have been always conscious that when we talk about people's participation, how can we take it beyond tokenism? When we say gender, how can we actually internalize it and take it beyond tick marking in the box? So, and that's why it is very important to make things relevant, the indicators that have been bottom up. So we did basically to have a stop open defecation, you need to have a toilet. So it is not as simple as having a toilet, but a toilet, a space wherein you can feel safe, comfortable, healthy, hygienic. So all these indicators, they came up. So it is an innovative approach and collaborative approach wherein multiple stakeholders are engaged, because in such issues we cannot work in isolation as in community, as an organization on ground. So it is a collaboration with the officials, municipal officials, urban planners and architects. We have a partner, the Urban Project. We have partnered with UNICEF. We so it's we have partnered with the elected representatives of all those areas. We've also partnered with the people who operate and maintain those toilets. To make it short, every stakeholders who are relevant to make the system of sanitation workable, safe, and hygienic. So we first challenge we all have before we go ahead with the indicators is having a database. So we realized that there is a discrepancy of almost 100 toilets with our data and the data that municipal authorities were having. So we decided to map the all 15 wards, administrative wards of that particular ward, and it was 9 lakh population and 501 toilets to it. So we created a database, we made a GIS mapping, and this was all done in collaboration with community, urban planners and architects, and one officer from the ward office to be present when we are doing a mapping of particular X toilet. And all these people, after having a set of drawing and looking at the facilities socially, culturally, infrastructurally, then everybody will say these are the points that needs to be repaired, that needs to be corrected, and they will sign that yes, this toilet is mapped and now we have given a code to this toilet, and these are the things which are recommended to make it better and to improve it or to demolish it and to construct it. And then the group of people who stays around that toilet will follow up with the administration and other relevant authorities, and we will facilitate this process. We will create a pathway in doing so. So it is creating a database, it is engaging the community and having a joint action plan, and then taking it ahead with the policy makers to have a policy brief on it. So we have been working in 51 micro and 42 macro communities in this particular intervention areas, and right from doing surveys till creating designs and designing an action for it everywhere. We've seen how we can involve the communities. And now comes a very important point that we are discussing in this session about the indicators. So there can be many indicators, but when we had 156 community meetings, 8 FGDs with different stakeholders, that is men, women, specially able, senior citizens, children, transgender community, and a workforce from solid waste management, water department, health department, from the municipal ward, we all together came up with the indicators that One was number of seats, but it was not just number of seats, but number of seats for men, women, transgender, and all other sections, 8 sections that I mentioned before. Then comes the indicator of accessibility. So accessibility is should include safe accessibility, because we had experienced that people have to travel walk 10 minutes, and there are incidences of harassment for women and girls on their way to the toilet. They have to carry a water in some of the toilets, and if they have to go post 7 p.m., then there has to be somebody accompanying them towards it. So here SDG, which talks about equal opportunities for women and girls, and an environment free from violence and any kind of fear. How can we have that indicator itself localizing when it comes to actually thinking about indicators for safe sanitation? Then there are other facilities, of course, which are also considered as equally important indicators to be safe. That is facilities for children, which are almost every time neglected. And our data says that if we have mapped 90 toilets, only out of which 5 toilets had facilities for children. So I will not get into the data of 500 plus, but this is just to give you an example. Lastly, I just want to highlight 2 things. What have we learned from this, and what are the challenges that we need to overcome in this regard? So one, meanings of concepts like safety, privacy, gender, we should be viewed it from community's perspective. And whatever that has been created on ground has a detailed pilot study has been it has been for a blueprint for the city, the recommendations for the city, a Mumbai city which do not have a city sanitation plan. Our findings have recommended the same, and we are working on it. And lastly, when we talk broadly about SDGs, we need to localize them, we need to make them relevant, and that is most important thing, we need to finance them. Otherwise, having these indicators in place will not be able to see a real picture. Financing them, making them locally relevant, and monitoring the implementation that is going on in the ground at both levels, at the administrative level and at the community level. And lastly, I feel only then we will have any chance in ensuring that S in SDGs also stand for successful. Yes, I'll stop here.
Thanks, Supriya. The last time we spoke, you mentioned a statistic which I still remember and horrifies me, that in this M block ward in Mumbai, M East block ward, there's one toilet complex that serves 1,400 people. So you can imagine during COVID-19, the challenges of social distancing and healthy environments when you have a deadly virus impacting us. And you can't, in a COVID situation or a disaster or a crisis situation, fix it. You have to fix it before it. So that's why your work is so important. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elsa.
And now we have Dhanashri. Dhanashri is from Shelter Associates, and she has been working, so Shelter Associates works with the informal settlements, and they have collected a lot of data from the informal settlements. It's on their website. You can check it out. So over to you, Dhanashri. You might have to unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
Sorry, there was a little internet issue. So yeah, now it is settled. May I share a screen? Is that possible?
Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead.
Thanks for having us here. So we are basically working in the urban areas, and from yesterday we are talking about the inclusion, which is part of kind of including women, children, differently able people, and LGBT community as well. And here we are working to include the urban poor, which is a larger part of our cities, and the entire economy, the informal economy works on with their help. So, but their living condition kind of we have is very we basically are working in the housing and sanitation sector from last 25 years to improve the living condition of urban poor in Maharashtra. Currently, we are working in 7 cities of Maharashtra, and we have architects, social workers, GIS, and some of the volunteers with M&E experts with us. This is Pratima Joshi, who is an architect and a founder member of Shelter Associates. Yeah, so we all together are working with an approach that, we have, whenever we are working in, say it is in housing or sanitation, we have to have data in place at first. So we basically have, mapped and surveyed all the slums in the city. Mostly, like from out of 7, we have surveyed 4 cities entire, like all slums we have surveyed, and we have a special data. So once the special data is in place, then it helps us in planning. And it also shows that what are the infrastructure which are available in the slum, and what needs to be augmented or needs to be given more to have a condition in the slum. So that is one of the main thing which we do whenever starting any work. We also have an approach to involve every stakeholder in the process. As earlier also it has said that we involved municipal corporation into it. We also involve elected representatives, that the political leadership also we involve them. And more importantly, the citizens for whom we are doing it. I just love the way Sahil has mentioned, not for us, without us. So we do also, look for it that we do not proceed any work without involving the communities in it. And another approach is a cost-sharing model, where it is not the one person or one stakeholder is doing something for someone. It is like everybody is contributing in the entire process. Take it as a housing or sanitation in both the sections. So the housing thing, basically slum rehabilitation, which is happening, happens in general, where people are actually uprooted from one place to another, and that is majority of the time is end of the city or the peripheral area of the city, and those actually drive them again into a poverty because the livelihood options are gone. Their other social amenities like education, health, education, or other facilities, market, and all that are also not accessible to them very much. So, which actually also goes making their living condition more deprived, and even the kind of structures it has made, like under SRA or something, we have seen that it is like a virtual slum. It is virtual and a vertical slum. It is being created, and people are just stuck in there where there is no ventilation, no light, and even sometimes the lift doesn't work, and it doesn't consider the people's living pattern. So we see that to work on it, basically we need to have a data, but that is one thing, and a participation of people right from the beginning, like say it is of planning or monitoring or execution, or even to assess the impact. Everywhere the people should be involved in the process, and we have a citywide perspective to do that. So given an example, we are going to show it here. Like we done a project in Sangli in Cookwood Municipal Corporation, where we surveyed all 78 slums, and we found that 35 slums are already on the private land, or maybe there are some preservation plans are already designed for there. So now or the other, these people have to uplift it from, like, they are going to taken out from those places anyways. So we try and see that the land ownership status, and we found that there are 7 areas where the government land is available. So we try and see that we relocated the plan where people do not have to relocate in the very far area, but it is just 3 to 4 kilometers of their current area. They will be relocated. So like this, we actually, if you see the blue points, those are the government land area, and the other red ones are the slums, which relocated in the blue areas. So now, when doing it, we have seen that the people's participation is very important. People should know that what is going to happen, how the structure is going to be, and whether it is good for them, whether they liked it or not, or whether it is suitable with their livelihood things. Like in Sangli areas, actually they were having the livestock as well. But if the building becomes, they do not have place to keep their livestock, like hens and other things. So those things has to be considered when planning any housing schemes. We have done that in detail with the community to explain them, and even the people those are going to relocate it, have a very detailed discussion about what kind of project is going to be and all. So it becomes like people also participated in making that process as well, even in the construction part. In one of our housing project in Pune, where people have designed their bricks as well, so they have actually participated in the execution part too. And this is the housing project I'm talking about, like Sangli, where near about 3,500 families have got relocated, and the planning has been done for it, and 1,395 units are now completed, and some of them are occupied this places over there. And these are some of the glimpses. People have started staying inside, and then they have renovated their inner house in a very beautiful way. And if we see the design of the households, that is also it has considered need to be having a good ventilation and light, and maybe places which are at the kitchen is not at the inside somewhere, so that from the kitchen you can throw something outside and it will spill over outside the building. So instead of having that picture, we have designed it in such a way where kitchen is at the corridor level, and generally it happens that people keep it clean. So while designing, we have also seen that whatever change in the longer term can be established in that particular community. So what this concept has given is basically, it has a water service and drainage located to their corner. And usually in the slums, like, 3 walls are getting shared by people, by the other household. But here we have seen that, the both sides should be open, so that the proper light and air should be going in. And even to have the maximizing use of these spaces, so that it can be used by people. In Sangli Kupwad area, people do not have do not have habit to cook their food on the kitchen table, like platforms. So we have not given that. So some of them were cooking sitting down. So we made it in that way. So whatever the structure was, we made it in such a way where people can live their life in a proper way. So that was our earlier project, which is already complete. Now we are into, Kolhapur under PMAY, we are doing a project. And we have done a project, like we are also in sanitation. So we have done one home, one toilet project in one of the slums in Kolhapur called Bondre Nagar. And if you see the red dot here is the slum. The slum is located like at the edge of the city. And that also have taken up under the PMAY thing. And when we actually got into detail, so we found that what planning under PMA, I was doing is like that structure was G+7. So that structure is basically G+7 or G+12, and again it is going to be a very huge thing where people cannot access everything. So when these come to know, these Bondrinagar people come to know about it, they actually deny this project and say that we do not want, because with the toilet they have actually renovated their houses and restructured it, and they do not want to go multi-story building. So they denied it. 100% people denied it, and later on then we actually got into details and try and see that how we can see and combine the nearer slums together and give another proposal for it. So we design the structure in such a way that it is just G+1, and people have the kind of in between space, because in communities in general it happens. It's not a kind of system where flat kind of system where door is closed. People usually keep their doors open and talk to each other. They have a bonding with each other as well. So we try and see that in this model that has been kept intact, so that they will have a good living, but they have a good living, but they will not have to compromise on other aspects. So like this project is basically, land has happened with the rule binding thing, and the design is already ready. Design is already ready, and people have formed their cooperative societies, and final beneficiary list is also ready, and TPR is also has been sent, and so this is the final status of the project right now. Yeah, I think I'll just stop it here. Thank you. So sorry for the disturbance in between.
Thank you so much for that, just showcasing your work in Pune in informal communities. I now want to invite Professor Rohit Shinkri. He is an architect and also the principal at Academy of Architecture in Mumbai, and he worked on the hawkers policy in the city of Mumbai, and I know he's also the member of the informal street vending committee in Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai. Yeah. Rohit?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
Hi. So hi everybody, my presentation will be in two parts. One, I'll just give a little bit of idea of what informal economy is, because I myself was surprised when I started studying about it. I mean, there are lots of aspects about it which we think we know, but we are not really aware of. So one is just the sheer scale and the scale of it. I mean, all around the world, from poor nations to the advanced economies, 80 to 8% of livelihoods, employment is generated by the informal economy. In India, it is very high. India, South Asia, Africa, and Latin America, it's anywhere between 60 to 80%. In India, it is 80% of non-agricultural employment. And not just the numbers, it also represents 42% of the GVA, the gross value addition. So it's not something marginal, or it's not something small in many of the emerging economies in developing countries. Within the overall kind of basket of the informal economy, street vendors represent 17.7% of the workforce. So street vending is actually the second highest employer after agriculture in India. So these are statistics that are quite staggering, right? The scale of this whole operation, what we call informal economy. In fact, I don't like to call it informal economy because it kind of tends to suggest that it is something that is a little disorganized. It's not disorganized at all. It's extremely organized. So I actually prefer calling it grassroots economy because that's the economy of the largest number of people. In spite of its this scale and its tremendous potential for employment, it is kind of systematically ignored by conventional economics and also by conventional urban planning. The reason for that is pretty simple, because urban planners, architects, urban designers are taught to think about land use or form, and neither of these really cater to the informal economy, because land use is the organized sectors of economy. It talks about residential or commercial or industrial or all kinds of institutional. There are defined land uses. The informal economy that is at the margin of all these. It is involved in all these, but it is at a margin. So conventional urban thinking doesn't really look at the informal economy very much. And the reality is that this is the only real chance we have of addressing urban poverty, because it is pretty certain that the formal economy is not capable of generating the number of jobs that are required in our cities. And so there is a need to change our perception about the informal economy, about the grassroots economy. It is not a marginal thing. It is not a problem. It is actually an opportunity. And it's a very, very positive opportunity, because people involved in this sector are actually honest, hardworking people who refuse to get into any kind of antisocial or criminal activity, and they prefer engaging into an honest livelihood. So that is something that we need to respect and we need to support as cities. You know? So that change in perception is important, because even now, I mean, even if you look at Mumbai's currently the 2034 DCR, it does talk about it, but it is pretty token. They talk about farmers markets and things like that. But it is still, compared to the, I mean, if you know the scale of the entire economy, it is kind of tokenism. So the first point is the need to change perception. The second point is to understand, second part is to understand the various occupational groups that are involved in the informal sector. And there are domestic workers, I mean, something that we are well aware of in India. I mean, the people whom we employ to do housework. There are street vendors, which are, again, this is something we are quite aware of in most cities in India and in most developing countries. The rack pickers, extremely essential. In fact, one of the reasons why the recycling happens very well in Mumbai is that there is an extensive network of rack pickers who know exactly what to collect, and there's a kind of channel for each kind of material. All that is in place. Then there are home-based workers who work from home. Now, it's a very wide range of them. I mean, there are, and in the current context, what the technology permits, this is a choice that many people make. In addition to these four categories, which are kind of recognized by researchers globally, I think in India there are two more categories. One is there are artisans and craftspeople who are doing traditional work, and there are also traditional occupations like fishing or other kind of trades which actually are very old, and their activity precedes the modern kind of organization of economy. So there are these categories of people who are engaged in what is called the the informal economy. The other perception which needs correction, that very often we think that this is a problem only of poor or developing countries. It is not. There is something emerging now called the gig economy, which is even in advanced economies, a lot of people prefer part-time and temporary engagements rather than more solid engagements. There is also this emerging pop-up culture, which again is an informal, which is a global phenomenon. So there are lots of aspects of this informality which is now being seen in the more developed economies, and it is probably going to be seen more and more because technology has caused certain disruption and restructuring of the economy. There is also more and more migration from places where there is a slightly higher kind of survival attitude and trying to do things as we can to kind of survive, to go by. So you see a lot more, and you will continue to see a lot more of such things even in cities of the advanced economies. There are also sectors, industries in the formal economy where there is a lot of employment of informal work, in construction, in retail, in garment manufacturing. So it is not that this is a isolated kind of or a parallel economy. It is something that is very, very intrinsically linked to even our main economy. The need to look at it is important because, a lot of the times people argue that it is already functioning. Why do you want to kind of interfere and bring order into something that is already pretty much functioning and thriving? I think the need to do that is basically to reduce the precariousness and the risks that informal workers go through, increase a sense of dignity and sense of belonging. They need to feel that they are accepted by the communities where they are active. Also increase their income, because one of the a lot of modern development economists say that there is something called a poverty cycle, and it's important that people find ways to get out of the poverty cycle, and the way to do that is to kind of have a little bit of extra income. And so once cities are a little bit more considerate about all these informal workers, and there is a kind of system to regulate things, it is likely that their incomes will increase, and they would probably be able to move on to more productive lives. And overall, I think it would, once we are more considerate about all these workers, it will improve the living standard of the city and the overall quality of life in our cities. So that's the reason why we need to start looking at it and not just let it be because it is informal and let it be the way it is. The other thing to understand is, coming to the main purpose of this campus, which is to try and look at performance indicators. And to get to performance indicators, first it's important to understand why do people operate in the informal sector rather than operating in formal employment. Very often it is the people with less, least education, least opportunities, etc., that engage into this sector. So there is a case of exclusion in terms of, you are doing activity, you are there because you do not have a place in the formal economy. In India, very often language is a problem. If you don't know English, you cannot, almost not get into the formal economy. So there is an exclusion at that level. There are also, like I mentioned before, there is an exploitation. There are parts of the formal economy that thrives on the exploitation of informal workers, construction, garment manufacturing, all kinds of manufacturing. So those are there. There are entry barriers also. There are legal, fiscal, etc., structures that people are not really very comfortable with, they don't understand, and they prefer staying outside. And a lot of the traditional crafts, artisans fall in that case. It's not necessary that they are economically not thriving, but they are just not knowledgeable enough about these structures, the legal structures of informal economy. And there is a last group which is voluntary out of it. I mean, people who would rather do, and that number now is increasing even in the developed economies. There are lots of people who prefer, I mean, what I call the gig economy. So I will come to the discussion on indicators later on. I will just present maybe the kind of work we had done when I was working for the MCGM. I'll share my screen. I'll try to do that. One second. Are you able to see my screen?
Rohit, yes, we can see your screen, but you just have about 3 minutes left, please.
Okay, then that's fine. I mean, then I will not share this. I mean, that's all right. So the work that we did was specifically about street vendors. And the whole objective of that work was to start looking at it as an urban and urban space problem. Because there's a lot of work done by economists, by sociologists. There's a lot of data by economists that kind of confirm the importance of the informal sector. But very little of it has actually been translated into spatial strategies within the city. And our effort was to try and look at it as a spatial problem. Even the law that was made, I mean, India has a law since 2012. It's a National Street Vending Act. So it makes it mandatory for all cities to provide for street vendors. Even though the law is now existing for almost 8 years, there are very few cases of actually cities which have succeeded in implementing that law, because that law actually ignores the spatial aspects of it. So, so it is important to understand the spatial aspects of it. There have been cities which have tried to do things. There have been architects and urban designers who have proposed things, but again, those solutions could not be implemented. One is because they were extremely disruptive. I mean, it is unlikely that a city will change all its street sections and motorable roads to provide more space. So what we were trying to do was to see how we are able to look at it as I mean, in the perspective of what is called now tactical urbanism. I didn't know that term when I actually did this project, which is to try and do little things that can add up, and do little things that are not necessarily seen as being done for the street vendors, but they are done for the cities, and they accommodate and they provide space for the street vendors. And the other important point to kind of understand is that, which is one of the reasons why that law is difficult to implement. The law says that 1 meter by 1 meter space has to be given to each street vendor. Now, it's difficult to imagine how they, I mean, it's difficult to understand how they came with that analysis of 1 meter by 1 meter. When we did our studies, we found out that there are people who need lesser space than that, and there are people who need more space than that. So the lesson to learn was that we need to observe how a particular activity is being conducted right now, how it is working right now, and then try and establish codes starting from there, rather than kind of just arbitrarily deciding on numbers and then wondering why that policy is not being.
Rohit, I know, you know, this is such an important topic because 90% of our labor force in India, for example, is in the informal community. So as the groups, we are going to get into breakout rooms after one keynote presentation. If we could quickly identify, how do we measure this? Are there 3 or 4 indicators that we can quickly share with the community?
The indicators actually would be first of all, to what extent is the activity, what kind of a legal status it has, the legitimacy of that activity is important. Then what kind of provisions, for example, I mean, if you, for those of you who have seen the local trains in Mumbai, there is one small part of one compartment that is meant for transporting goods for
street
hawkers.
vendors. Yeah.
Yes. Now, it is inhuman. I mean, they can't. It's just too small, and it just doesn't. Kind of cater to the scale of what space is required. So, for example, why not? Since I mean, in Mumbai we have ladies special trains, so why can't we have hawker special trains as well? You know, so where we will have bogies without seats, and so there are these kind of provisions, spatial provisions that I mean, in the urban space as well as in the transport and things like that, that could be thought of. And I think what is important also is whatever indicators we come with, they have to look at progression, because it is important to see how, for example, harassment is decreasing, how incomes are increasing, how other facilities are being provided, etc., etc., etc. So I think indicators are a little, I think, tough to kind of immediately come to, because the whole spectrum of informal activity is very, very varied. So the indicators might be different for different kinds of informal activity. There could be general indicators that we use for, I mean, human development, like healthcare, education, and things like that. But I mean, the difference between people in these activities and in informal activities. But I mean, that would be a discussion I would love to have with
I'm actually going to share the link to the hawkers policy that you created for people to get some ideas on it. But creating better physical infrastructure for the street hawkers and the informal community is a great idea. I also encourage everybody to see this market that is in Barcelona. It's a flea market for the old historic artisans of the city. That's such a great kind of indicator for including they have I don't know the colloquial term there, but they have like a beautiful public market for the old, like the chor bazaar of the city, for example, and to build infrastructure for the informal community is another way to look at it. Rohit, can I encourage you to share the link to the hawkers policy? I know we are completely running out of time.
No,
we have one more.
I'll share that. I'll try to first find it, because
I think I have it on your website, but I wanted to thank you for introducing this.
The other thing I
topic.
just shared, there is this organization called Viego, this women, which is generated a lot of work on the informal. So I've shared the link to their publications, but it is kind of getting shared privately, so I'm not able to share it. Thank you, Jyoti.
Yes. Thank you, Rohit, for that. I know we're completely running out of time. This is day 2 of the Urban Thinkers Campus, but appreciate your introduction to the informal economy to us. I want to ask Sudeep. Sudeep, are you here?
Yeah,
and
can
I know
you hear me?
want to share your screen as well. Please go ahead. Sudeep is going to talk to us about inclusive mobility. He's an urban transport planner at the World Resource Institute. And he's going to talk to us about inclusive mobility, which I think is one of the most crucial elements of inclusive city.
Great. Can everyone hear me? Just anyone let me know. Yeah, great. Thanks, Pratima. Hi, hello, everyone. I know it's been a long evening, so I'm going to try and keep it as short as possible. When Pratima asked me to talk about inclusive urban mobility and transport, I just realized there was so much to talk about, just going beyond our organization, the work that my organization does. So I thought I'd just bring together a few topics and share a bit of an insight on the subject. A quick introduction. I work for an organization called the World Resources Institute, essentially working in the space of sustainable practices in different fields. I particularly work in the transportation sector of the Sustainable Cities program. So just to quickly dive into the topic itself. So when we are talking about transportation, transportation and mobility is really a means to an end, and it's a conduit to kind of access a lot of economic opportunities, a lot of educational opportunities, and a lot of medical opportunities. If we are really looking at inclusive mobility, you're looking at an intersection of something that is reliable, something that is safe, something that is affordable and equitable, and all of these together kind of create a common space called inclusive mobility. If you were to delve into the usually marginalized sections that basically face marginalization in mobility, there are essentially three categories. One is socially economically marginalized population, then people with limited mobility or differently able children and aged populations, and the third group being women. So what I'll do right now is I'll go into each of the pieces, and let's start off with kind of trying to figure out how they actually tend to move in different geographies across the world. So it's a bit interesting actually when you start comparing for people who are living in poverty. Their travel patterns are very different from any other socio-economic group. They make far less number of trips, and they travel much lesser, and they take a lot more time to do it. So their inability to access efficient and affordable transportation really costs them a livelihood, which is kind of a vicious cycle. You would imagine if you compare how people how economically marginalized populations travel across the world, you'll see a stark difference between cities which are known to be fairly affluent and cities which are known to be not so affluent. This is a comparison between cities in North America and Australia and Africa. You can see that a very two key characteristics. One is that you would imagine cycling would have been something that would have been popular in poor countries, poor cities as well. But the challenge with that is that owning a cycle and access to the cost or upfront cost of owning a cycle is a lot more difficult for many marginalized communities. So what ends up happening is that they walk a lot more. So if you can see the cities that are listed to the right, you'll see a lot, the percentage of people walking and the distance of people are walking a lot more as compared to the cities you see on the left. That is a key indicator. Long walking trips that are being undertaken are key indicators of inaccessibility to equitable transportation modes. The thing is that with the mobility and transportation, it's a fairly complicated. It's a very complicated relationship. It's a fairly complicated relationship only because when a very high value, high infrastructure value mobility infrastructure is put into a city, it does quite opposite than what it's supposed to do. It doesn't actually create a lot of mobility options for the people who need those mobility options. It actually pushes them further away from those mobility options, because such investments cause ripple effects in and around those corridors, and then there's a general gentrification, and therefore people who were already marginalized start moving further away, and they have lesser access to any affordable transportation. This is an example that we see on. This is an example that I pulled out of an ITDP's Brazil study, where it looks at a city in Brazil, Recife. This was where the BRT was the BRT corridor was implemented, but and you can see that the concentration. So what you see in brown, the other concentration of people with single with the minimum wage with minimum wage. So you see the concentrations are really away from those corridors. As the land prices increase, they get displaced and they move away from those corridors. So there needs to be a sort of conscious effort to ensure that everyone benefits from infrastructure projects such as these. This is another example, same city. The infrastructure provision here was a cycling lane, but frankly, the cycling lanes provided benefit to more affluent neighborhoods than it did provide any benefit to the marginalized community in these groups. In fact, 77 from the numbers from the study, 77% I think of the population, around 32% of the population actually were earning 3 times the minimum wages, whereas only 10% of the population, so 23% of the population which were earning minimum wage and less were actually benefiting from such infrastructure. So there needs to be a conscious sort of approach when we are looking at some of these infrastructure provisions to actually help mobility, improve inclusive mobility in a city. So what are some of the things that can be done? So this is a project that was taken up, which is known as the Village Bicycling Project. It's actually looking at focusing on a rural area, but it is very doable in a lot of urban settings as well. Where in this particular project, they identified neighborhoods, and what they did, they created a donation drive of bicycles, so that the marginalized population actually had a means to travel. They also kind of helped them figure out how to maintain the cycles, and so created a sort of a economy around that as well. Impact, there was a lot of gender inequalities and women's limited access that was addressed. Also, the people were able to increase access to jobs, schools, healthcare, etc. The second piece that I wanted to just talk about is just how public transport fares are structured. This is an example from another Brazil city where 46% of the poor residents actually lived in and around the neighborhood, in and around the urban areas, and every day they would make a trip to the urban center for their jobs, for accessing education, etc. And they spend quite a significant portion of their incomes on this. What the government did was create this integrated transit fare, which allowed multimodal usage in a two-hour time frame. And what this allowed was that people who actually lived far, especially the marginalized communities who actually lived far away from good transportation infrastructure, was able to take multiple modes at the same cost to access different opportunities. And this made a really big difference to how transportation was then suddenly become more accessible, became more accessible than it was when they had to pay separate fares for every stage of the journey. So these are some of the things that really makes transportation transportation a lot more inclusive. Okay, so now I'll move on to what about people with limited mobility and how do they travel? Frankly, if you look at numbers across, and I love pulling out these two sets of numbers. So this is one in United States and this is one from Jakarta, Indonesia. They actually say very similar things. People who are affluent and who are disabled are able to afford cars to move around, and that is possibly the only option for people who have mobility, who are differently abled in some way or the other. In the Jakarta numbers, if you were a medium income group, your transportation mode may not be a car, but it would have been a scooter. But if you are from a low income group, what happens is that you really don't have too many opportunities. There isn't public transportation is not a mode that you could access. It's just not equipped to handle people with special needs. And what ends up happening is that there is a huge unemployment rate amongst people in this group as compared to the other economic groups. The United States numbers were very interesting. New York was the only city which actually had public transport usage, even though even with its even amongst its people with disability. A strong public transportation system kind of does help in providing access, even though in the New York system, not all the stations have been equipped to be disabled friendly. If you look at the indicators, it's really difficult. There hasn't been too much study in kind of evaluating how many transportation systems actually adhere to universal mobility norms. But the infrastructure such as buildings get audited quite frequently. This is a comparison of how many government buildings are kind of safe, are more adapted for the differently abled. A similar audit can be done for stations and bus stops and other infrastructure locations, and as well as systems, in fact. And those would be, and a percentage of the total would be a great indicator to understand how accessible they are for people with limited mobility. For children, it's fairly actually the impact on children is quite it transcends socioeconomic background. Doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. If you're a child and if you live in a neighborhood that's not designed, that is designed only for cars, your ability to access schools, etc., ability to kind of independently move down is curtailed tremendously. And that's a huge challenge. It doesn't matter what economic group you are. So that's a huge challenge for children. I think it's just cross-cutting. There are many examples. I'm just going to go through them very quickly. There are many examples on how this can be changed, especially from a citizen engagement point of view. A lot of the transportation providers are so focused on focus on the operations pieces that they do not look at these pieces consciously. A citizen engagement to bring out these aspects would be really helpful. And this has been done not only for transportation services, but also even like infrastructure provisions. Understanding from the neighborhood who are the people that you're kind of providing for, and then kind of imbibing those nuances into your neighborhood. I think that is a great instance of a collaborative approach to creating inclusive mobility. I'm going to just skip this one. Go to the last one. The group of people that I wanted to talk about. How do women travel? Now, the travel patterns of women are weighed as caregivers, as people who have a lot more doing multiple roles in urban household in their households. Their trip movement patterns are very different from their male counterparts. While the male counterparts tend to have a very straight origin destination, women tend to trip chain a lot. That means they would do a lot many more stops on the way to do a lot of other to kind of achieve a lot of other goals while before coming home or getting to office. There is a study that was done. I think in India. This was a study that was done in India by the Ola Mobility Institute of what are the preferences of mode choice amongst women, and it shows a really high preference for public transport amongst poor women, and as the social economic status improves, the want for the preference for public transport drops dramatically. This actually kind of goes to say a lot of things. In fact, and probably the most significant piece that it does say is that women from low economic groups do not necessarily have access to any form of transportation that the household may have, whether it's a cycle, a scooter, or a car. And public transport is the only option available to them. And that's why you see it's a bit of more of a captive audience than a preference, I would imagine. And if you were to see what are the aspects that kind of affect their travel choices, it's quite a wide range. It's not just about the travel itself, but it's even getting to the bus stop, waiting at the bus stop, and there are many. And how long do you wait for? There are statistics that show that women feel tremendously insecure just in their walk to the bus stops. At the bus stop, because bus stops tend to be located at located in areas which are single use, against a dead wall without much lighting. There's a huge sense of threat that they feel just waiting at the bus stop, and if they have to wait for long, the amount of anxiety that they go through is exponentially through the roof, because it is that much time that they feel that they are exposed to the insecurities of that situation. So there's a huge, there's a considerable amount of insecurity that is felt just approaching the public transport system, and this is even besides the kind of yeah.
We have a couple of more minutes. We have a minute.
Yeah, I'm almost done. Yeah.
But these are great indicators for women-friendly.
I had a lot of fun going through this. I mean, it was like I pulled out a lot of stuff. Anyways, so just to conclude, there's a bunch of things people have done. This was in Netherlands, where the community got together and they kind of worked with the women of the migrant population to start training them how to use the cycle, so that they will be able to access a lot more opportunities and not restricted to their neighborhood. This is one of my most favorite examples. This is this group in Chennai. The major problem with mobility and transportation is that there's a tremendously dearth of women engagement in the sector, in the planning, in the operations, etc. And therefore, a lot of the operations get planned in the way men would plan it, and that's very, very different. And I'll give you an example how. When these guys started running their operations, they were allowed, the women drivers were allowed to operate within a certain radius from their homes. Now, what that allowed them to do is that in a case of emergency, they were able to access their homes immediately in a span of 5 to 10 minutes. Now, that made a whole lot of difference to their entire ecosystem. They were able to consider this as a job, because they could also take care of their role as a caregiver. and that these changes are quite significant. And this is one of the things that they did, but it's quite considerable. Yep, good. I'm done.
Thank you, Sudeep. I think that was great. I think lots of ideas on indicators and also citizen action. I want to thank all the experts who shared their insights. Supriya, Dhanushri, Rohit, and Sudeep. Elsa, we are ready to get into the